then?
Sure.
All right.
Hello and welcome to Cordials and Liqueur. We're also going to have a section on ports today done by Brad. So thank you for joining us today. I'm Nicole Howard. All right, guys, so like I was saying earlier, I learned so much. I didn't know that we even had this many liqueurs, and I bartend. So I really feel like this is an opportunity for us to all learn a little bit more. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about different ways that the cordials can be served, or after dinner drinks can be served. I'm also going to talk to you about what is an aperitif and what is a digestif, which I think is really important. And not that you're going to go out there and be like, oh, hey, everybody at the table, I'd like to, do a digestif and, get into that. But if somebody asks you for one, it just makes you feel more confident knowing, oh, yeah, I absolutely have aperitifs, I know exactly what that is. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. So ports and cordials are the perfect complement to any dessert and the perfect way to delight your guests and finish out an amazing night of great service. However, it can also be used to start a meal as the aperitifs. I do want to talk a little bit about one of the drinks that's on our list called the Sicilian cup. I do find a lot of times that people will ask me, how do you describe the Sicilian cup? What does it taste like? So I made the cocktail for you. We're going to pass it around. You do have straws you can taste as I'm talking. It does have 2 ounces of Pimm's number 1. Pimm's is a flavored gin made with fruit and herbal botanicals, caramelized orange and warm spices. It tastes like sweet. It tastes sweet and herby. The thing about liqueurs is a liqueur can start with any base liquor. So this one in particular is gin, but it can be rum, vodka, cognac, brandy, any of those things, and then they add in all the extra sweetness, botanicals after the fact. Okay. Then we use the Averna Amaro, which I think is actually really fantastic. That is going to be on your second page. It is an Italian herbal liqueur that is commonly consumed as an after-dinner digestif, but it can be considered an aperitif or a digestif, which is one of the only ones that can do both. Okay, so what do you guys think of the Sicilian cup? What are some flavors you get?
You really get that cinnamon. Obviously.
Cinnamon?
Yeah.
Okay. Cinnamon? Any gingerbread or anything like that? Okay. So those are just some of the ideas for you when you're selling it. And honestly, it really is great because as an aperitif, what that does is that it's generally meant to be a low alcohol content, and it's really meant to get your body ready to eat food and kind of make you hungry. So that's really what an aperitif is for. I think it's delicious. I think it's one of Sarah's favorites. So. And then that has, so in addition to the other 2 elements, it does have homemade simple syrup, which we make here in-house. We garnish it with a cinnamon stick, and then also a fresh sprig of mint. Okay. Wanted to go over here a couple of different aperitifs. Now, aperitifs, classic aperitifs would be like dried vermouth, gin, bubbly. So one drink that's really become popular, it's obviously not on our menu, is an Aperol Spritz. But I did want to talk to you about it because I get a lot of orders for it. So I wanted you to try Aperol. Now Aperol is slightly bitter. It is an Italian bitters. And the way that you make an Aperol Spritz would be with 2 ounces of Aperol, ice, and then you would top it off with Prosecco. Okay? So you got 2 elements there. You have Aperol and bubbly, and that's going to make your Aperol Spritz. So slightly bitter. I mean, it's not terrible. It's not normally what I would just drink on the regular, but honestly, peel or orange wedge in there, I feel like it's really refreshing. Okay. So I just have here all basically, so a vermouth, any of the vermouths would be considered that. The Saint Germain, personally, I really, really enjoy Saint Germain just because it's so refreshing and so delicious. It's a French liqueur that is made specifically with hand-picked elderflower. And when they make it, when they hand-pick, there's only like 2 to 3 weeks out of the entire year in which they can harvest this. So it's really pretty exciting to talk about. Also, I really love the Gothic bottle. I think it's absolutely fantastic. But a lot of times people will use Saint Germain in place of a vermouth. I've actually made Cosmos with it before, instead of using triple sec. So to me, that's pretty cool. And would you like to try Aperol? You got all the taste? Okay, sweet. All right, so that would be your aperitifs. I don't know if anybody has questions over that. We'll keep on moving. Then we get into our digestives. Now, I feel like, oh my gosh, there's so many. But what does everybody always go to? Bailey's, Kahlua. That's it, right? Bailey's and Kahlua. But my goodness, there is so many other options. Sambuca is another huge one, and we're actually going to talk about that in depth here in a second. But I did want to point out another coffee flavored liqueur, which I do want you to try, called Tia Maria. And the thing of it is like people do not even know how awesome it is. I also think, so we have this. I want to make sure you understand it. I do have descriptors. Anybody need to taste it? You had to want to taste it.
Is that an espresso martini? Yeah, which one?
In the espresso, we generally put in like Kahlua and a touch of Frangelico.
Yep. I'm not going to drink it. I just wanted to smell it. So if you want to pass it to somebody else.
Yeah, it is a vanilla vodka.
Oh,
Yeah. I was sorry, I was just talking about this before.
yeah.
Yeah, she should have one.
Here he is.
Sorry, I got lost track of time.
No worries, again.
Is this his price difference or?
It's Aperol. I didn't drink it. I just smelled it. So, yeah.
Really good.
Yeah, it's so delicious. I feel like it's crazy because it's like, would you like to try? Honestly, very similarly priced, totally delicious, and it's gonna open up your guests' eyes to something different.
Yeah.
You know, if you're sitting there like, oh well, I like Kahlua, you know, it's like, that's cool. Why don't we try Tia Maria? It's gonna give you a different flavor. I like Frangelico because it's got that really nice hazelnut, nutty flavor. Chilaka is very interesting. It's orange, vanilla, a little bit of nuttiness. It's very interesting too. Sambuca, definitely something that we sell a ton of. Now, when you're ringing up Sambuca is typically going to be in a snifter. Okay, that's just traditionally how it's served. And it's always going to be served with coffee beans. And do you guys know any reason why? I mean, unless you read it just now. But yes, there is a specific reason why Sambuca does have the 3. And that is to symbolize health, happiness, and prosperity, which I think is really cool. When you are ringing up any of these liqueurs, you are going to want to get into the liqueur. So let's say you hit Sambuca, then you need to hit the X. The X is going to tell the bartender that we need a 2-ounce rocks pour. And the reason for that is that when you fill up your snifter, 2 ounces will perfectly balance in this glass if you tip it sideways. Okay. Plus, it gives the guests exactly the amount that they're expecting. So make sure you do that. And I do want to touch on, sometimes people, definitely not with Sambuca, but a lot of times with, let's say, Grand Marnier, they want it in a snifter. So once again, we would do the rocks pour, 2-ounce pour, but they say, I prefer to have it served warm. Has anybody ever had anybody ask that? Okay, thank you. So what I think is a fantastic way to serve to a guest would be to first put some hot water in this, bring it to the bar. Then I bring a cup, just like I'm serving tea, like this. And once that liquor is in here, I'm gonna set it in here. Now the guests can sit and turn it if they want, whatever they want, but this gives them that opportunity to sip it slowly and keep it warm. Okay? How often do I get that request? Not very often, but I know that people have gotten the request and they're kind of confused on how to do that. So I think this is a really good way. If you want to, like we do towel service after shrimp cocktails and whatnot, you can also hand them one of the roll-ups afterwards because obviously the outside is wet, okay, if you're doing this. But drinks can also come in other things, not just the snifter. They can come on the rocks, okay? So if I'm ringing this up, all I have to do is put, let's say, Bailey's rocks pour. That's telling the bartender that you have a 2-ounce pour in here with rocks. You don't need to specify with rocks because the only reason this will come without rocks is if you specify neat. Okay, so I'm just letting you know that. Any coffee drink, so anything that you decide to sell to your guest, which we are going to get to limoncello here in 5 seconds. Anything you decide to sell to your guest that's going to be in a coffee cup is going to come in one of these. Okay. Now I have had people like, I don't want to do that. I want my liqueur on the side and I want to add it to my coffee cup. That's fine. I'm not going to argue with the guests. We do have like cute little things like this that we can sell. Now, something else I want to mention, and I think it's a very big missed opportunity here, is that have any of you ever tried the lava cake with Baileys on it? Have you ever tried lava cake with Frangelico on it, over the top? If you did want to do an add-on, it would be a super easy upsell. You get the liqueur, you put it in this, serve it with the dessert. Makes people happy, I promise you. So, they're like, what? Lava cake, or even like the gooey butter cake. I mean, whatever. It doesn't matter. Or ice cream, or anything, guys.
I think do it on a creme brulee before even.
Right, creme brulee. Like, I love all these options, but all you're doing is giving the guests an experience that they haven't had before. You're expanding their mind, you're expanding their options, whatever. You want to reuse it? Okay. The other one I wanted you to try, the last two, and of course, we can get into anything else if you guys have questions. Patron XO is a tequila-based liqueur with flavored coffee, so I want to throw that out there. One question I get, Jeremy and I get a ton, is do we have limoncello? Because people ask for limoncello, they love limoncello. Yes, we do have limoncello. We've had it for a little while, so we do have this. Most of the time it's going to be served on the rocks, or we can shake it and give it to you neat. But I think it's delicious. Anybody want to try?
We'll try the lemon.
Try like the limoncello. What else? You try this. Anyway. And a lot of these liqueurs, did everybody get to try? Yes. Okay. A lot of these liqueurs come from Italy, France, from all over. It's more of a European tradition.
Do we make any liqueurs here in the US? What would be the number one type products?
I don't even know. I'd have to look it up. Like I'm thinking, like, no, I don't think so. Most of these are not. Well, if you're trying that, and we also are going to try the Fernet, because I think everybody should try it, I do want to talk to you a little bit about B&B, and of course there's a little bit of a write-up on there. But as I was doing research, I found that B&B is a combination of Benedictine and brandy. Okay, so Benedictine was actually invented by the Benedictine monks, and it was used as an elixir. So basically, like a healing elixir, which means that they were feeling really good. And then in the 1930s, a bartender was like, what is this going to taste like at brandy? So he combined the two. This is literally one of the only pre-mixed liqueurs at all. Like, you don't have pre-mixed liquor. Okay, so B&B is actually one of them. So I think that's interesting. Also, B&B tastes like magic. It's so delicious. So I do recommend that. When people ask for Fernet, we do have Fernet. If anybody wants to try it, are you ready? It's going to have a very bitter taste, but it's a digestif. So sometimes digestifs are wonderful and delicious, and sometimes they taste like Fernet.
I'm scared now. Why did you do
It smells amazing.
It smells good.
Herb, but it's got some, it's like a weird.
All right. So once I do want to remind you guys that if you want to try any of these liqueurs, just come up, get a sample, Google it, get information. But anyway, I think they're all pretty fantastic. The Domaine de Canton, by the way, Canton actually originated in Japan, which is why you kind of have this bamboo-shaped bottle. But it actually now got transferred to France, and it is a ginger liqueur, which I really like when I make at home, like apple cider cocktail. I do like an apple vodka with the Domaine de Canton.
Can you smell it?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's really cool. And then Chambord, if you've ever heard of a Cure Royale, is going to be the Chambord, which is a blackberry liqueur made in France with Prosecco. Okay. Like I need something else. All right. You gotta try something else?
Yeah. Can you bring some wine out?
Ritz. I gave you something else. Make you happy.
What is that?
She's like, hey, all right, and then pretty quick here, I'm going to give the floor to Brad. Any other questions? Here, make your better.
Except the B&B. This reminds me of Rocky and the smell of it.
This would be good with like a chocolate martini or espresso martini if you did it.
More stuff.
Definitely not the
I know, more stuff, right?
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you guys have any questions or you want me to look anything up or whatever, there's so much. But there's so much. There's so much.
Wait, what is this? I forgot. What's this? What is it?
black bottle.
I will go have a seat.
The problem is getting it all up.
Yeah, that's accurate.
Right, you want to start, and I will. I'm gonna make your drink.
Thank you, Howie. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you very much.
We appreciate the
You
partnership.
made a fabulous teacher.
I would.
All right, we
I would.
there's so much to cover on this. We were talking and we were collaborating and trying to get it all in a short amount of time. Like literally you could spend weeks talking about port or sherry or anything with port. So this is going to be a really quick run through. I'm going to focus mostly on port, a little bit on sherry, and then I'm going to touch just very briefly on sake and ice wine and tokai. Those are just very lightly. So we're going to start with port. One of the fascinating things about wine that I love is that it just encompasses so many things. It's like geography, it's politics, it's history, it's location, it's the climate, it's the soil, it's the social customs, and how chemistry, how all that works together. And I think fortified wines really exemplify that probably more than anything else I can think of, how it just brings everything together. So port, what is port? Port is a fortified wine. Its history can go back to like the 1600s. And a fascinating thing about looking at history is we realize that the more history always repeats itself. We think that we live in a weird society today, but when we look back, a lot of this was going on. So 1600s, what was going on? France and England, they were not getting along very well. And English, they were people who were really consuming a lot of wine, a lot of liquor and stuff like that. So they weren't liking each other. King George III said, okay, France, we've had enough of you. We're going to slap a really big tax on you. So much so that people could barely afford to drink wine from France. So what are we going to do? We can't afford that. We've got to turn somewhere. So they started turning to France and Portugal. And at the time, they also made these treaties where these pacts where people went to Portugal, you imported things from Portugal, you would get all kinds of credits. And you wouldn't have to pay any tax, it would be very lucrative. So a lot of people were moving there because they could live without taxes. So a lot of people established roots there. So now they're shipping their wine from Portugal to England. The only problem is when it's making this journey, back then they just had big wood barrels, right? So they didn't have glasses, they didn't have glass bottles with stoppers or corks or anything like that. So when you're shipping this across the ocean, it's a long journey and the wine is going bad. So then they figured out if they fortify the wine with brandy, with something else. So brandy, what is brandy? Brandy is basically distilled wine. So that's making a liquor out of it. So if they fortified it with this high alcohol brandy, then it's going to keep the wine from going bad. So that's what they figured out, and that's really kind of how port was developed. So port is coming from, and just like we talked last week about, bourbon having to be from a certain area, and maybe not so much these days. Really, port is only supposed to be coming from Portugal, from Cordials, we call that. Yes, you're going to see ports from other areas, but technically it's called port has to come from here. So this is Portugal. This is Portugal. This is coming from the Douro Valley, at the very top up here. You can see kind of border Spain up here, right? So Douro Valley, right here, top of Portugal, border of Spain. And why that's so important where it's coming from is because of the terrain. So this is very steep slopes. It's made primarily of granite. This is like rock, like straight up and down. They have to terrace it, otherwise they're going to have a lot of erosion. They're working a lot of the areas like with donkey or by hand. You can't have machines going up here because it is like straight up and down. There's just a little level of, just a little bit of soil on these rocks. The roots have to go down about 20, 25 feet trying to seek nutrients and trying to seek water. because there's so little nutrients to be found. But what that does, it causes a very intense flavor on the wine. So port can be made up of up to like 80 different varietals of wine, but primarily it's usually just 5. The most common is Touriga Nacional. I may not pronounce it quite correctly, but that's close. So that's the primary grape that they're going to be used. This is a very, very hot area where this is coming from, where you can imagine this is on the riverbank, and it's like on the border of Spain. Temperatures are like can be in the 104 and hundreds for long periods of time. So this grape, the Touriga, can withstand a lot of heat. And incidentally, they're using this grape in a lot of other areas. In fact, they're also using this for Bordeaux right now, and we've always talked about all the Bordeaux varietals, and we all know those 5, but they're actually have improved to use this one. Why? Because of climate change. Because things are so much warmer, and they're also using this a little bit in California too. As things get warmer and warmer, people are turning to a grape that has been proven to withstand a lot of heat, and that's this grape. So that's where it's coming from. Because of the area, this is like, you know, like I said, this is mountains. This is really cut off. For years, they didn't have electricity. They didn't have roads going through until they joined the European Union, which wasn't really all that long ago. So to ship it, they couldn't do all the aging there because they didn't have electricity. They didn't have air conditioning, anything like that. So they'd have to take it on ships. They would have to take it to Porto. And Porto, and then by Porto on the other side of the river was Villanova de Gaia. And that's where it's kind of like this lodge where they would take all these grapes. They would do a lot of sorting and they would do a lot of aging. And that's when they would kind of determine, okay, this is going to be this style of port, this is going to be this style of port. And they would determine all that. An important thing to know about port is when they're introducing the liqueur to it. And instantly, when they're putting brandy in it, they're not just taking like E&J brandy we have here, and they're not just dumping this in wine. It's like, all right, we got port. It's like a special. Someone try this at home, kids. It's a special mixture that they're making of a brandy. It's not really brandy as we know it, but that's what they're calling it because it is a distilled liquor. So it's important to know that when they're putting that in, it's during fermentation. So what happens when you put that in during fermentation? It's stopping fermentation. What happens when you stop fermentation? You get a lot of residual sugar. So that's why port is relatively sweet. That's why it's sweeter than sherry, because sherry you're introducing it after the fermentation. Here you're introducing it before. So that's just a little brief history of port. Very simplistic. We're going to get into some of the different styles. There's a lot of different styles. There's more than what we have here. I'm just going to go over what we're serving right now. Let's see if I can glasses. Do you all have glasses? So this is on one very extreme end of the spectrum, and this is called Novel Black. And we've had this port on our list for quite a while. Not real popular. We don't sell a lot of this. Normally, I'd say about 90% of what we're going to sell is a Graham's Tawny, and we'll go over that. So while port has been around for a long time, this is a relatively new expression of port. And what makes this characteristic, you can already see, right, how dark it is, that inky color, why they call it black. Because it's very, very pungent. So what they're looking for, they just want the very freshest expression. They want tons of fruit on this, very vibrant. This is not where you're aging it a long time. You're not aging it in oak or anything like that. You're not oxidizing it all to kind of get that nutty color. This is just intense fruit. So what I would recommend this for, technically ports, if you really want like the ultimate pairing for ports, it's going to be cheeses. And a lot of times people will have like a cheese course after their dinner, and then they'll have ports with that. That's traditional, that's the classic style. Obviously they don't have cheeses like a cheese board here anymore or anything like that. Even when we did, I don't know if that many people really had it for dessert. But this is also nice as an after dinner drink. People enjoy it. If you're going to, a lot of people like to pair this with desserts. This is one I would pair with more like the deep rich chocolate. So if you're having like the lava cake, something like that, this is probably what this would be my choice to pair with, just because you have that intense fruit, that darkness. I think the fresh fruit kind of offsets the chocolate, the deep rich chocolate of the lava cake. So that's what I would go to. This is also formulated to be used in a lot of different drinks as well. And that's one of, as they're kind of reviving port through the years, that's one thing they've done, and they're using a lot of cocktails. We're going to get to the Fonseca in just a few minutes. Actually, we're going to get to that next. And then we'll feature a drink that uses a Fonseca 20. So the Fonseca Bin 27, I got information there for you on this. This is a ruby port, but this is called a ruby reserve. Now, a lot of times reserve is kind of one of those nothing words. It doesn't really mean anything. People call it reserve. What does that mean? This really is reserve because this is select. This is for the very best. And real quickly, I want to touch on, as I'm pouring this, I want to touch on vintage port. We don't currently have a vintage port. I'm trying to get a vintage port. I've tried for a long time. We're supposed to have Graham's vintage. It's been like impossible to get. So the best I can do is to get the Graham's 30. But it by no means is a vintage port. So it's now, I'm going to touch real quickly on vintage, what that means. Vintage, only certain years could be made as a vintage. It's very much like champagne in this. Like you'll hardly ever see, you won't see very many vintage champagnes, right? You're going to see it on Dom Perignon and stuff like that, but most of the champagnes you're going to look at, it doesn't have a vintage. They have reserves. Port is the same way. All the conditions have to be right. Tasting councils have to be together and say, okay, this year you can call this you can call this a vintage. 2007, everything was great. Yep, we get a vintage. 2008, no, it's not going to cut it. It's not going to be a vintage. A lot of this has to do with quality. A lot of this has to also do with marketing, because they want to keep it very rare. They want to kind of keep it exclusive, so they have to keep the prices up a little bit. What's that?
Oh my gosh, I'm sorry. Nothing. I was literally thinking about something else the whole time you were talking. And then I realized, wait, I'm actually interested in this. I missed everything you just said. Okay.
Can you repeat
Go
that?
back.
Start over. There's a video. There's a
We
video.
can edit it.
There's a video. Thank God.
Ain't going back.
Okay, I'm going to mention something before we go further into bin 27. I was going to touch on something else. So you see the Graham's 20, Tawny Port, right? 20 year, 30 year. Wow, that means it's 20 years old, right? Not necessarily. It's actually an average of all these years that they're putting together. So it could be 23 years, it could be 17 years, it could be 5 years, it could be 30 years. They're putting it all together. Now, this is not just willy-nilly. They have to have this all accredited. This all has to be, they're being audited on this, and they have to say exactly what they're putting in. But
It's like
basically,
old wine. It's like old wine. It doesn't even mean anything.
it's basically, so this is an average. So there could be some very young ones, very old ones, but it has to average 20 when you put it all together. All right, back to the bin 27. So as you can see, this is a ruby port. How would you compare this to the first one you had to the black?
It's smoother, yeah. It's like lighter body.
Yeah.
Okay.
Slightly less sweet.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
more winey.
Yeah, it's more winey.
Yeah.
I think it has a dryness to it too on the back.
So just, and maybe just a little more mellow, right? That's what I'm kind of hearing people say. Okay. So reserve ruby, that's important to know because when we think of like, I don't know, years ago when like great-great-grandmas were drinking sherry all the time. I don't know if you guys did, but like for Christmas sometimes people drink it. But they were drinking like sweet, nasty, or not sherry, like port. They were drinking sweeter versions of ruby port, and that was what people were drinking a lot. This is a little bit different because it's reserved. It's a little more refined. You want to go over the Fonseca sour real quick?
So the Fonseca sour, unfortunately, I think I might have poured it. It's right in front of you. Yep. I think I may have just poured a little bit too much Fonseca in it, and I apologize. But it is made with our Four Roses bourbon, 2 ounces of that. It has 0.75 of homemade cinnamon syrup, 0.75 ounces of lemon juice. It has a few dashes of tiki bitters. You stir it, you pour it in, and then you top it with the Fonseca. It's meant to be similar to a New York sour. However, with the Fonseca, it doesn't float because of viscosity, so it does stick to the bottom. But it is going to be slightly sweeter. Sweet stuff.
So I talked a little bit about vintage. We're going to move on to the next one. Talked about vintage. That's hard to find. It's very, very expensive. Basically, vintage. You know, a question comes up is like, do I age port? Vintage port is really the only one where you're going to age, and it's usually going to be a ruby port. And that's the one you're going to sit down for a long time. When you're going to buy it, you're going to age it at home. Late bottle of vintage is kind of like another marketing thing that Taylor has come up with relatively recently. I would say like even like last 15 years, where it is a vintage. So this is 2016, but they're making it so they've already aged it for you, and that's why it's a little more economical than if they sell it for you to age yourself. Why is that? I suppose because they can control the conditions a little bit more. But this is ready to drink out of the bottle. You don't have to sit this down for a long time. All these are ready to drink right away. And if you look at like the Taylor, a lot of these companies like Graham's, Taylor's, these are all English names, right? And that's because of that early influence that I was talking about when England was getting involved with Portugal. People were moving there. People were getting involved with the wine they do.
Bigger and sweeter.
Still have that whininess, you know.
So vintage, this is like a really good deal for vintage wine. It is vintage, but it's like at a fraction of the price as opposed to those like a straight up vintage. Straight up vintage. I want to say this is like $15 an ounce. So not terribly expensive. Whereas vintage would probably be, a straight up vintage would be twice as much. And I've got tasting notes in there you can consult that. Again, I don't run into this pretty fast. Any questions on the Taylor Flaggate at all? Okay, so now we started with black, we've worked our way through ruby, we've gotten to late bottle vintage. Now we're going to go to kind of the other end of the spectrum, and when people are asking me for port, first thing I ask is, do you want ruby or do you want tawny? Because there's really one end or the other. And you're going to, so what tawny is, kind of the same process, same grape, same area, but the biggest difference on this is that they're letting this oxidize. They're doing that by, as it sits in these wood barrels, they're using the wood not necessarily to get the influence of oak and wood into it, because they're using really natural oak for this. what they want is like oak can allow a little bit of air in, right? It naturally lets air in. So when that happens, it's oxidizing. And that's what they want. This is 20. Yeah. We sell tons of drinks 20.
I always try my best to sell money on the table.
So now when you're oxidizing, you can see that tawny color. Everybody's seen like tawny shoe polish, right? And it's kind of like that brownish, yellowish color. What are the notes we're getting out of this?
Caramel, brown sugar, butter,
Nutty.
Toffee, butterscotch, right? All that stuff. So we talked about like we talked about
So good. I need another one alone.
Yeah, this is really good.
So we talked about the rubies, the black, being good with dark chocolate, right? It's not like we're ever going to correct it. If someone wants to get this with a log cake, that's fine. We're not going to say no, so you really shouldn't do that. if that's what they want to do, that's fine. But personally, I think that this pairs brilliantly with our gooey butter cake, with our carrot cake, that toffee, the caramel type of stuff is when I think this really shines. I think this would probably be pretty good with our sticky cake as well.
Oh, yeah.
Really featuring right there.
This is creme brulee.
Because of the burnt sugar.
Creme brulee would be,
That's why.
yes, because of that. And we do have the 30-year version of this as well.
Yeah, how much is that? 30. It's not that bad.
I think it's 15.
I think it's
It's like 15.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's not that much. We don't have much of it left. I'm going to try to get some more. I'm still working on to get some vintage reports. I get vintage reports. But they've just been really hard to get. Incidentally,
Just looking up at his face.
and you might see, on some of these, you might see Quinta. You're going to see Quinta, Quinta. You might have stated like Quinta Inn before. So, what does Quinta mean? Quinta basically means like estate. So that, and some of these will be like single estate. So you might see single estate, but you'll never see like single grape. You'll always see a blend used in ports. Any questions about port before we wrap that up and move next door to Spain?
Wait, what's ruby again?
Ruby is so that it's when it hasn't oxidized. It's very fresh, very pronounced flavors of fruit. You get more fruit. So now we're moving on to something similar, but very different. And so this is sherry. Sherry is predominantly coming from the Andalusia area of Spain. And I apologize, I looked for my Spain map today and I couldn't find it. I think someone in my house snagged it.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, I would really consider aperitif. Truly, if I was going to have sherry, I like to have like charcuterie, cheeses, and nuts, things like that. And you're going to get a very, look at that color. See, like kind of like that amber color. So what does this smell like?
There's something there. What is that?
I've never used anything like that.
Exactly.
Tastes like an old lady.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's exactly, I mean, that's the common thing, is like, I've never had anything like it. It's so different. It's so weird. Defies a lot of different things. A lot of nuttiness, right? Yeah. Just a lot of nutty.
grass stuff in the mower for a couple weeks.
Yes.
It's like my grandma's basement. Like, that's where
These jokes are good, I love them.
Do you guys see how much this is a little bit drier than the port? Like that port, you got like that sugar, you got that residual sugar, and now this has a little more of a dry finish to it. Because that's what I was talking about, how they are fortifying this, but it's after the fermentation. So this has a really, just really briefly, this has a really interesting process. Primarily, there's a lot of different grapes to use for this, but primarily 90% of the time you're going to see different amounts of palomino. Palomino is the main grape used in this.
Can you spell that? Like jalapeno, but with an M.
Yeah, just like palomino, palomino. Yeah. This has a unique process on it. It's so they're not filling the barrel all the way, and then when they get the alcohol level has to be 15%. It has to be between 14 and 16%. When they get it to 15% exactly, that allows kind of like this film to form on the top layer. And as it's letting out oxygen, it's also preventing oxygen. And all the nutrients are getting spent and they're forming this layer, otherwise known as you can call it membrane. It's also kind of like a stump. It's kind of disgusting, but it's forming on the top of this wine. And that's allowing us to preserve. And as they can do different things with this, on this particular style, they're actually letting that floor sit for a while, and then they're introducing more wine into it, more fortified, which is stopping the floor, which is stopping the fermentation, and that's what's really getting a lot of your nuttiness. They also have a process where they keep kind of dripping different wines into that floor, and there's all barrels stacked up, and that's called a Solera system, where they just keep reinvigorating this floor going on. This has been used for years and years and years, this tradition. And that's very
It's
simplified.
kind of like a very old starter, right? Like a
Yeah.
red starter.
Yeah, exactly.
But
Yeah,
it's been a while
it's always
since it's all one big thing that's been crazy with cherry for
it's always like, reading about this and stuff. I was thinking about like sourdough. I gave people like a sourdough starter and stuff like that. Again, this is very different than the sherry, like Harvey's Crystal Cream, and again some stuff that maybe our grandma was drank. This has that drier finish. It's not for everybody, but we do have a lot of guests coming in that do like this.
Do you know that cost?
I want to say it's like $42.
It's all the same, 10 to 15, $30. We need one that's like
You're gonna sell that one.
I mean, you can try out.
grams 20 should be $30. Grams 20 should not be a lot.
I agree.
It used to be expensive, but now I don't know why it's not.
Okay, so we're gonna wrap this up. I'm just gonna go through these real quickly. I know I've talked about these before with a lot of you, so I'm not gonna spend a lot of time on this. But this is Sauterne. This is coming from the Bordeaux area, primarily made with Semillon. That's going to be the main grape. Sometimes you'll see some Moscato as well, but usually it's a good amount of the Semillon. This is, like I said, like the southern area of Bordeaux, which is along the ocean. This is where they get a process called botrytis. Botrytis sits on the grapes, and that's what kind of shrinks down these grapes and stops the fermentation. Otherwise known as, they call it the noble rot, because it is a rot, it is a fungus, but they are hoping the conditions will be right, so they'll get this coveted fungus on this.
Well,
I'm gonna go for fungus all the
It's a
way.
good band name.
Double rod. It's good.
Coveted fungus?
Yeah.
That's a great picture. How about some double rod?
I'm scared to try it.
Very, so this is very, very sweet. This is like honey, right? right? But there are some, but you can also get some of the,
So sweet.
little bit of yeast,
Oh my
little bit of
gosh.
citrus coming out of it. I really like this with creme brulee.
That's not bad.
If you have something like,
It is very, very sweet though.
this is sauterne.
Like Saturn, the Saturn.
SAUTERNES.
Sorry.
S-A-T-E-R-N-A-S.
Yes.
Yes, thank you. Saturn. Okay, thank you.
And I believe this sells for about $14 a glass. This stuff is, it's not inexpensive. It comes in a, little 3.7 bottle, 3.75 bottle, because it is quite a process to make this. And it's produced.
Yeah.
A lot of grapefruit, a lot of.
Yeah, because you're still getting that citrus. It's not all about sweetness, and I'm glad you got that out. There's so much more. People say, oh, that's like sweet, that's like honey. Well, there's a lot more nuance in that.
It says it uses Sauvignon Blanc as part of one of the grapes.
Okay,
so-
well, that makes sense. And then this is a similar taste, similar process. Again, I'm very simplifying this, but this is Tokai. This is coming from Hungary. And there's different levels of sweetness on this.
Did you buy this anywhere at all? Or is it just?
Oh yeah, for sure. Tokai. This is from Hungary. Tokai? Yeah. T-O.
TOKAJI.
This is my favorite. T-O what?
TOKAJI.
J-A-R?
JI.
J-I. T-O-A-K-A-J.
Can you give us a blurb about this? Are you gonna talk about this?
What's that?
I know, that's what
Talk
I'm
about this one?
It's similar process with the Tridents coming from Hungary. I like to like all the different grades, the history and stuff like that. I'm running out of time.
The taste is
I just
pretty
want
good.
everybody to kind of be aware of that. How would you describe the difference of this between this and something?
This one is definitely has, yeah, it's bright, but it doesn't have that citrus. It's more like pear and, yeah, like.
We had a table this last weekend when Fred wasn't here that was asking my would we have Sauterne in. And I was like, we do, and then I brought them out like little samples of this also to try, and they were like, we like this even better. And then I looked very briefly into it so I could speak confidently about it, and they've been making Tokai longer than they've been making Sauterne.
Yeah.
So they kind of originated the whole thing.
Anyone else get apricot out of this too?
See that?
Yeah.
Apple and pear is-
And then the other one, which I'm not going to take out, but the other sweet dessert wine would be ice wine. And it's coming from like the Niagara, Buffalo area, Canada. Oh my God. And that's going to be a similar process where it's freezing and it stops the fermentation. It's going to be similar to this. So that's really quick rundown. I didn't even go over all the ports. We also have the Dow as well. The Dow 10-year.
Is the Dow a ruby or is that?
That's a ruby.
Awesome, Brad.
Any questions?
Yeah, that was so.
Thank you.